Hello, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas war. It is currently the evening of December 28, 2023 in the United States, the morning of December 29, 2023 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, the IDF reported today that another hostage that is held in the Gaza Strip, an Israeli U.S. citizen, is confirmed dead. According to the reports, she was killed on October 7th along with her husband, and her body was kidnapped to the Gaza Strip. Both she and her husband are currently held in the Gaza Strip and are among the 129 hostages that are held by Hamas and other different Palestinian organizations. Moving on to the negotiations regarding a possible hostage exchange and a truce, there are two channels currently operating. One is the Qatari channel, one is the Egyptian channel. In the Qatari channel, Israel has given Qatar a proposal for a next phase of a truce and a hostage exchange and has been awaiting Hamas's response. According to reports today, the Israeli War Cabinet met in order to discuss messages that were sent from Qatar relating to the deal. However, it was later reported that the messages do not yet constitute Hamas's official answer to the Israeli proposal. Israel is still waiting on that. Relating to the Egyptian deal, after it was reported in the last several days that Egypt had put forth a three-phase plan that was rejected by Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, then it was reported that the Palestinian Authority also was rejecting it. Israel never responded to it, yet Egypt said that no side actually rejected it. Today it was reported by Egypt that continuing the leaks of different proposals, no one has actually rejected it, and Egypt is continuing to refine the deal in order to try to bring both sides together in order to agree to it. According to the current proposal, the three phases will include a 10-day truce in which Israeli women, children, and elderly who are hostages in the Gaza Strip will be released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, and during this time, the IDF will also withdraw from main cities in Gaza and allow mobility of civilians among the Gaza Strip. After that, phase 2 will include a week-long truce in which female IDF soldiers will be released in exchange for more Palestinian prisoners, presumably more heavier Palestinian prisoners, quote-unquote, and the exchange of bodies held by both sides. And the third phase will be a month-long truce in which the male IDF soldiers that are held in captivity will be released in exchange for presumably even heavier Palestinian prisoners, a complete Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and an end to the attacks on both sides. It is noteworthy that in the current iteration of the Egyptian deal, they have dropped during the third phase that clause that called for technocratic government. This was a sticking point, both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, that said that they will not agree to dismantle either one of their governments. The current iteration, Egypt seems to have dropped that. This relates to other reports that we'll talk about later on about disagreements between Egypt and the United States regarding the day-after plan in the Gaza Strip. Other news following the visits of the both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad delegations to Egypt earlier in the week, a Hamas delegation is due to arrive in the coming days to Cairo again in order to give Hamas's response to Egypt's ongoing refined proposal. This is a report in the Saudi Asharak News Network. Moving on to the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip, continuous rockets and mortars were sent from the Gaza Strip towards the southern parts of Israel, although less than in the past during more intensive days of the war. Rockets targeted primarily the areas of Ein HaShlosha, Nirim, as well as there were barrages of rockets sent towards the areas of Ashkelon and Chof Ashkelon. Moving on to the fighting within the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Beit Lahia, there were major IDF bombardments reported throughout the city. In Darj Tufah, substantial IDF activity was reported throughout the entire vicinity, including bombings from the air, sea, and artillery units, offering support to the ground forces as they are moving through the area, going house by house in the Darj Tufah area in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, there were bombings reported in Deir el-Balach and in the El-Maghazi refugee camp, and according to different reports, these bombings were some of the most intensive that the central areas has seen since the beginning of the war. Relating to El-Maghazi refugee camp, the IDF reported that it is investigating the major bombing that occurred on Sunday in the refugee camp, killing over 70 Palestinians. It stated that the attack was carried out against two targets housing Hamas operatives, but that in the attack other buildings were inadvertently damaged, causing the unfortunate death of many civilians. The IDF expressed sorrow for the deaths of involved civilians and stated that it is taking notes of the mistakes that occurred in this attack in order to learn for future attacks. In the Nuseirat refugee camp, there were bombings reported against an apartment building in the area of the refugee camp. According to Palestinian sources, these buildings are housing internally displaced people. It is unconfirmed what the targets of those bombings were. Moving on to the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Han Yunis, there was major IDF activity reported against the different tunnel infrastructures throughout the city. Engineering units of the IDF are continuously pouring into the city and are carrying out major offensives against the different tunnels underneath Khan Yunis. In addition, substantial gun battles reported in the Qutayba Mosque in the heart of Khan Yunis. The IDF identified a major underground tunnel infrastructure, and Hamas activated different ambushes against the IDF forces from within these tunnels, and major gun battles were reported until the IDF managed to take over the mosque. In addition, there's also reports that the IDF took over Hamas Nukhba headquarters within the heart of Khan Yunis, and has also taken over different manufacturing plants, as well as positioning itself on different logistical access points throughout the city. In Rafah, a noteworthy bombing was carried out, killing at least 20 Palestinians and injuring 55. This is noteworthy because while bombing campaigns are occurring throughout the entire Gaza Strip, Rafah specifically has been spared of the majority of bombings until now. This may indicate that the IDF either is targeting something specific in Rafah or is starting to turn its attention more and more to Hamas activity in that southern city. Other news coming out from the Gaza Strip, there are reports that Muhammad Isa, who is the son of a deputy leader of the Al-Qassam brigades, Muhammad Isa, was killed in an airstrike in the Gaza Strip. It's unclear at this point if he was the target of the airstrike or if this was an attempted target assassination against his father, Muhammad Isa. Right now the report is that he himself was killed. Other news, Minister Gantz stated that the IDF is ready to move to the next phase of the war. This will be the more low-intensity phase where the IDF sets up positions and instead of continuously expanding its operations, launches more surgical operations against different Hamas networks and infrastructure throughout the Gaza Strip. This comes amidst disagreement in Israel's war cabinet regarding when to move to this next phase. Minister Gantz and Eisenkot think that the IDF is ready to move to the next phase, whereas Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant think that the IDF should continue its current very high-intensity phase at least until the end of January. Other news, the IDF is reporting that it has collected 65 million computer files and 500,000 operational documents and maps from Hamas headquarters within the Gaza Strip. All this is helping the IDF to build the intelligence picture regarding both the level of forces that Hamas has within the Gaza Strip, as well as detailing its plans on October 7th, how it carried it out, and mostly, though, mapping out its underground city, as the IDF hopes to use this information in order to get to the locations that different hostages may be held. Regarding casualties, 3 IDF soldiers are reported killed in the last 24 hours and 49 injured. This brings the total of IDF soldiers killed since the invasion began of the Gaza Strip to 165, and 921 are injured. On the Palestinian side, the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 210 Palestinians were killed in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 21,320, and 55,603 are confirmed injured. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip reported that the number of internally displaced people in the Gaza Strip has crossed 1.9 million. This is out of a total population of roughly 2.2 million. Ongoing streams of Palestinians have been seen arriving in Rafah in the last few days. Specifically, as fighting intensifies in Khan Yunis and Deir el-Balah, there are reports that at least 100,000 Palestinians have continued to pour into the Rafah area. This area, the refugee camps there, are literally exploding with people. There are reports that some refugee camps that were designed to house 1,000 people are housing 30,000 and more, and this relates to the ongoing reports that are coming out from the UN regarding the deteriorating health conditions in the refugee camps in Rafah, with doctors specifically citing infectious diseases that are spreading throughout the different refugee camps. Regarding the entrance of aid trucks, the United Nations reported that 110 aid trucks carrying food, water, and medical supplies entered the Gaza Strip on December 27th, and 76 aid trucks entered on December 28th. It is unclear at this point if this is an entire report for the last 2 days, or if these entered at midnight, since the UN report was a little bit vague about when these trucks actually entered. Moving on to the West Bank, there was a Palestinian attack carried out against Israeli security forces in the Mazmuriya checkpoint in East Jerusalem. An Israeli police officer and security official were injured in a stabbing. The attacker was 23-year-old Palestinian from Jabal Mukaber in East Jerusalem. He was shot and killed. Other news, as part of the major IDF activity that were reported yesterday, the IDF operation is now confirmed that it targeted different currency exchanges and different money laundering rackets that were in charge of funding money and laundering money for Hamas in the West Bank. The operation involved major ground forces that were seen in Jenin and in Ramallah, as well as in areas of Hebron and Nablus. A total of 9 Palestinians are reported injured in this operation, and millions of shekels and dollars are confirmed that they were confiscated in the various different cities. There's also reports of a Palestinian that was killed in confrontations with the IDF near Bethlehem, and another report of a Palestinian that was killed in confrontations in Ramallah. A total of 21 Palestinians are reported arrested in this operation in the last 24 hours. Other news, the UN Commissioner for Human Rights put out a report today about the Palestinian situation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem since the war began. The report cites widespread abuses of Palestinians by IDF forces, specifically focusing on the nature of IDF arrests of Palestinians and searches of homes. It details a lot of inhumane arrests bordering on torture, and lists the number of Palestinians who were arrested since October 7th at 4,785. This is nearly double the amount of Palestinians who are arrested that are cited by the IDF. The IDF in its reports has cited between 2,300 and 2,500 Palestinians that have been arrested since October 7th. According to the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, the number is 4,785. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon and Syria. There are continued escalations. Rockets and missiles were sent from Lebanon, specifically by Hezbollah, towards the northern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours. 2 Hezbollah drones were intercepted in the Upper Galilee and the Krayot area near Akko in the northern parts of Israel. There are also barrages of rockets sent towards the Granot Galil, Granot, Araba, Ramsha, as well as 2 missiles that hit targets in Kiryat Shmona, causing damage to infrastructure. Hezbollah also claimed responsibility for 7 different border incidents. This usually involves gun battles with IDF outposts, and reports at El Manar and Al Jazeera both stated that Hezbollah fired 12 missiles towards different IDF outposts in the Hardov area. Regarding IDF retaliations, the IDF reported that it carried out substantial retaliations against sensitive Hezbollah targets throughout southern Lebanon, specifically noting attacks that occurred in the Ita Shabab area, as well as in the Ramia areas, and Al Miyadin also reported that the IDF carried out substantial attacks in the Anata village. Reports also stated by the IDF that the different operations were carried out in the Litani areas. There was no information given about what the actual attacks were, but the IDF did list that it attacked sensitive targets of Hezbollah in several different reports. Other attacks were reported by the IDF also against different launching sites and units firing RPGs by Hezbollah throughout the last 24 hours. Other news, Hezbollah announced that it has disabled most of the IDF's lookout capabilities along the border in a series of attacks. This is very critical because the October 7th attack launched by Hamas began by Hamas using drones to target the different lookout posts and security cameras that the IDF has set along the border with Gaza, and later was confirmed that in a series of attacks in the months prior to October 7th, Hamas was systematically targeting the different lookout sites of the IDF. Now Hezbollah announced that it has disabled most of the IDF's lookout capabilities in a series of attacks along the border. Other news, there are reports in Syria that 2 Israeli attacks occurred near Damascus, and this is now several nights in a row that there are reports in Syria that Israel is carrying out attacks throughout different targets throughout Syria. The Syrian Human Rights Observatory stated that the attacks targeted the Damascus airport. This is unconfirmed, although it fits the profile of the nature of the way these attacks were carried out. Other sources, however, denied this, and the radio station, the Voice of Damascus, stated that Israel carried out an attack in the Tel El-Sahan area and the Asawida region. These are vast military regions south of Damascus. Moving on to some of the regional developments, the United States reported that a drone and ballistic missile sent from Houthi-controlled parts of Yemen were both intercepted in the Red Sea. Other news is more and more fractures that are being seen in the international coalition that the United States has set up to safeguard maritime activity in the Red Sea, after nearly half of the countries within this maritime force stated that they want to remain anonymous for fear of retaliations or due to their internal political situation. Spain and Italy both distanced themselves from the coalition, with Spain announcing several days ago they will not take part in the coalition, and Italy also being vague about how it is going to support this international effort. Other news, there were reports in Lebanon that the Islamic resistance in Iraq brigades, these are one of the militias in Iraq that are loyal to Iran, attacked an airstrip in the Golan Heights of Israel. This matches a report that came several days ago that there was some drone attack that occurred in the Golan Heights, however no information was given. Now the Islamic resistance in Iraq stated that it attacked this airstrip in the northern parts of Israel. Moving on to some of the political and general trends that occurred in the last 24 hours, amidst the political turmoil that is going on in Israel, there are attempts by the Likud, the party headed by Benjamin Netanyahu, to try to placate the situation. Specifically, there are reports that Netanyahu is meeting with Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir in order to try to silence his quote-unquote troublemaking as he is trying to replace the head of the prison service in Israel, which violates the coalition agreement between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Minister Gantz, which is threatening to tear apart the war cabinet. Other political news, Iranian Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian stated that Hamas has sent messages to Iran that it can carry on the war for months and that Iran should not be pressured, thinking that Hamas is going to collapse. He added that while the United States has sent messages to Iran that it does not want to expand the conflict, Iran responded to the United States, saying that the U.S. is the one that is working to expand the conflict regionally by supporting Israel and carrying out its ongoing offensives against both Gaza and Lebanon. Other news, there are reports that Israel is trying to coordinate with Egypt and the United States to possibly build an underground tunnel barrier on the Rafah border that will stop Hamas' smuggling of weaponry between Egypt and Rafah. So according to reports, while the border that Israel had set up between Israel and Gaza completely broke down on October 7th, this was the above-ground border, while there are reports that the underground border, the underground infrastructure that Israel set up in order to stop attack tunnels from coming in, was in fact noted to be a success. No attack tunnels actually crossed over from Gaza into Israel. Now Israel is trying to coordinate with Egypt to set up this underground barrier along the border as well, and Israel specifically noting that while Egypt is concerned that Israel is going to move its ground forces into Rafah, and this is going to cause a large amount of Palestinians to possibly flee into Sinai, this may be an alternative for Israel having to move into Rafah and take over the border with ground forces. Moving on to speculations regarding the future of the Gaza Strip, amidst the ongoing U.S. pressure on Israel to come up with a day-after plan, the War Cabinet in Israel was due to meet tonight in order to begin discussing Israel's day-after plans. However, this again caused major political upheaval in Israel, including threats by the religious Zionism party headed by Bezalel Smotrich to break apart the coalition, saying that the War Cabinet is not the one that should discuss this. Minutes before the cabinet was supposed to meet, Prime Minister Netanyahu folded before this pressure. He changed the agenda such that the War Cabinet did not meet about this, and instead delayed any negotiations about this. According to different reports, the expanded cabinet in Israel is going to discuss the day-after plans next week on Tuesday. Other news relating to the fact that the current Egyptian proposal that I mentioned at the beginning of the report drops that clause of a technocratic government that will not involve Hamas. There's growing reports, according to Qatari Al Arabi Al Jadid, that there's disagreement between the United States and Egypt regarding Hamas's role in a future governing body of the Gaza Strip. According to the report, while the United States believes that Hamas cannot take part in a future governing body of Gaza, Egypt believes that the idea that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad will simply disappear is unrealistic, and therefore it is trying to come up with a formula that will be agreed upon by both sides where Hamas can have a diminished role but still have a role in the future government of the Gaza Strip. This likely relates to the reports that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad outright rejected Egypt's initial proposal, saying that they will not give up their governing position in the Gaza Strip. Now Egypt is trying to come up with a formula that will allow them to stay in the Gaza Strip, but in some sort of diminished role. And finally, there are reports by an official in Hamas that remained anonymous rejecting Khalid Mashal's statements that were reported yesterday. After yesterday was reported that Khalid Mashal, one of the senior leaders of Hamas, said that Hamas will consider recognizing Israel in the future, possibly as some sort of formula for establishing a Palestinian state. The official of Hamas today rejected those statements, saying that is not on Hamas's agenda. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.